The Blackwood family ledger, dated March 17, 1876, contains a peculiar entry written in the steady hand of Thaddeus Blackwood, patriarch of what was once one of Iowa's most prosperous agricultural dynasties. The entry reads, "Today I have secured the future of our bloodline. The arrangements have been made. God forgive us, but there is no other way." This seemingly innocuous notation marks the beginning of a practice that would continue for 3 generations. A practice so aberrant that when finally exposed in the winter of 1898, it prompted the authorities to seal all related records for nearly 8 decades. The story of the Blackwood family begins like many tales of American prosperity in the mid-19th century. In 1851, Thaddeus Blackwood, a physician trained at Edinburgh Medical College, emigrated from Scotland to the newly formed state of Iowa. Unlike many of his contemporaries who sought fortunes in gold or industry, Thaddeus was drawn by reports of fertile land ideal for experimental agriculture. He purchased 400 acres outside the nascent settlement of Blackwater Hollow, bringing with him his pregnant wife, Elspeth, and a considerable collection of medical texts and botanical specimens. Thaddeus's background merits further examination. Records from Edinburgh Medical College confirm his enrollment from 1842 to 1847, with particular focus on obstetrics and embryological development. His thesis, titled "On Hereditary Determination and Physiological Similitude in Familial Lines," received mixed reviews from the faculty. Notes from his advisor, Dr. Malcolm Fraser, express concern about Thaddeus's excessive preoccupation with genetic perfectibility and his troubling fascination with twin studies. Nevertheless, his technical proficiency earned him his medical credentials, though his subsequent application to the Royal Society was rejected without explanation in 1848. This rejection appears to have been a pivotal moment for Thaddeus. Personal correspondence discovered among his effects suggests a growing bitterness toward the medical establishment, which he felt had dismissed revolutionary insights out of conventional timidity. In a letter to his former classmate William Thornhill, dated December 1849, Thaddeus wrote, "The true advancement of medical science will not come from cautious men in comfortable lecture halls, but from bold experimentalists willing to transcend the arbitrary boundaries of so-called ethics. The New World offers precisely the freedom required for such advancement." The land Thaddeus purchased in Iowa proved even more fertile than anticipated. Within 5 years, the Blackwood estate had tripled in size. Thaddeus's experimental crossbreeding of grain varieties yielded crops resistant to both drought and early frost, a development that made him not merely wealthy, but essential to the region's survival through several harsh winters. His agricultural innovations won him the respect of local farmers and businessmen, establishing him as a community pillar despite his reserved nature and limited social engagement. Yet despite this public success, peculiarities about the Blackwood household soon became apparent to their neighbors. The first was Thaddeus's insistence on delivering all births on his property personally, refusing assistance from midwives or other physicians. The second was the family's pattern of births. Between 1852 and 1866, Elspeth Blackwood gave birth to 6 sets of twins, all identical, all male. In an era when twin births were considerably more dangerous and identical twins far less common than today, this statistical anomaly might have drawn scientific attention. However, Thaddeus maintained no correspondence with medical colleagues and allowed no examination of his wife or children. Local accounts suggest Elspeth's health deteriorated markedly with each pregnancy. Martha Wickens, wife of the general store proprietor, noted in her personal diary in 1864. Poor Mrs. Blackwood appeared at church today, more ghost than woman. That man works her like breeding stock, with another set of twins swelling her belly, though the last pair hardly walking yet. She speaks little, and never without him hovering at her shoulder. The bruising at her wrists suggests she is not merely exhausted, but restrained at times. Census records from 1870 indicate that only 3 sets of twins survived to adolescence. The pairs born in 1852, 1858, and 1866. Local school registries contain no record of the Blackwood children, suggesting they received their education at home. Indeed, the sole documentation of the Blackwood sons' existence outside the family's private records comes from the quarterly church attendance roster at Blackwater Hollow Presbyterian, which notes Thaddeus Blackwood, wife, and sons, present for Easter and Christmas services, though never for regular Sunday worship. The family's church attendance provides a rare glimpse into their public presentation. Reverend Josiah Hartley's parish notes from Easter 1868 observe, "The Blackwood twins present an uncanny uniformity in appearance and manner. Unlike natural twins who develop subtle distinctions, these boys move and speak as if governed by a single mind. Most disturbing is their absolute silence unless directly addressed by their father. Their mother watches them with an expression I can only describe as mournful vigilance. I attempted conversation with the eldest pair after service, but they responded in unison with identical phrases, as if reciting prepared answers. There is something unnatural in such perfect mimicry. This isolation might have continued indefinitely had it not been for the economic crisis of 1873, which devastated agricultural prices across the Midwest. The Blackwood estate, despite its productive capacity, faced potential foreclosure. Bank records indicate Thaddeus had invested heavily in experimental agricultural equipment and laboratory supplies, creating unexpected vulnerability when crop prices collapsed. It was at this juncture that Thaddeus made a decision that would ultimately expose his family's secrets. He accepted a position as visiting lecturer in agricultural science at the recently established Iowa State Agricultural College, requiring his periodic presence in Ames, 70 miles from the isolation of his estate. The college appointment offers insight into Thaddeus's broader ambitions. His lecture notes, preserved in the college archives, reveal a man straddling the line between legitimate scientific advancement and disturbing obsession. While his agricultural lectures focused on practical techniques of crop hybridization, his private annotations draw explicit parallels between plant breeding and human genetics. Marginalia on his lecture about wheat cross-pollination includes the notation, "Similar principles apply to human stock. Control of breeding environment critical. Isolation prevents contamination from inferior genetic material." During one such absence in the spring of 1876, a traveling photographer named James Keller sought shelter at the Blackwood estate during a thunderstorm. He was admitted by Elspeth Blackwood, and while waiting for the weather to clear, encountered what he later described in his journal as a most extraordinary scene of familial configuration. Keller observed 3 identical pairs of young men, aged approximately 24, 18, and 10. What disturbed the photographer was not their identical appearance, but rather their behavior. Each pair interacting exclusively with their twin, seemingly oblivious to the others, speaking in what he described as a language of their own construction. Most disconcerting was Keller's observation that the eldest pair seemed to behave not as brothers, but as a married couple, with one twin adopting distinctly feminine mannerisms, dress, and duties. Keller's journal elaborates. The twin in feminine attire prepared tea with practiced domesticity, addressing his identical brother as "my husband," without apparent irony. The brother reciprocated with affectionate touches that would be appropriate only between man and wife. When I expressed confusion, the feminine twin smiled with genuine perplexity and said, "Father has explained that we are two halves of a perfect whole, male and female principles in matched vessels. Our union fulfills divine design." The middle pair watched this exchange with anticipatory interest, while the youngest twins appeared distressed, particularly the one wearing a girl's pinafore despite his obvious resistance to it. Keller's journal indicates he was hurriedly expelled from the property when he inquired about this arrangement, but not before he heard one of the middle twins refer to his brother as wife. Disturbed by what he'd witnessed, Keller approached Reverend Hartley upon reaching Blackwater Hollow, describing the situation and expressing concern about potential immorality and coercion. The Reverend's response, as recorded in Keller's journal, was unexpectedly reserved. The Reverend listened to my account with more resignation than shock. When I pressed him on whether authorities should be notified, he replied, "Mr. Blackwood's influence in this county runs deeper than you comprehend, sir. Previous attempts to investigate irregularities at that estate have resulted in misfortune for the investigators. I would caution you against pursuing this matter for your own safety." Upon Thaddeus's return from Ames, he discovered Keller had been documenting his observations for potential publication in a scientific journal. What followed was the first recorded instance of violence associated with the Blackwood family. Keller's body was discovered in Carpenter's Creek 3 days later, his camera and journals missing. The local coroner ruled the death an accidental drowning, influenced perhaps by Thaddeus Blackwood's respected position and the coroner's considerable debt to him following the financial crisis. Sheriff's Department notes, discovered decades later, reveal an investigation more thorough than the official record suggests. Deputy William Hammond documented bruising patterns on Keller's body inconsistent with drowning, as well as a witness report of Thaddeus Blackwood's carriage near Carpenter's Creek the night before the body was discovered. Hammond's investigation was abruptly terminated by Sheriff Thomas Collins, who cited insufficient evidence and the sterling character of Dr. Blackwood. Hammond resigned his position shortly thereafter, relocating to Nebraska Territory without explanation. The incident prompted Thaddeus to further isolate his family. He resigned his position at the college, citing health concerns, and constructed a 10-foot stone wall around the estate's perimeter. Local records indicate he employed only seasonal workers from distant counties, never local labor, and required signed confidentiality agreements, an unusual practice for agricultural employment in that era. The wall itself became a source of local speculation and folklore. Children in Blackwater Hollow developed elaborate dares involving touching the wall or climbing it after dark, though none apparently succeeded in glimpsing the estate's interior. The most complete picture of life within the Blackwood estate comes from the journals of Elspeth Blackwood, discovered in 1959 during renovation of the property's east wing. Her writings reveal that Thaddeus had established what she termed the divine pairing system sometime after the birth of their first twins. According to Elspeth, Thaddeus became convinced that each set of twins represented a perfect union of masculine and feminine principles within identical biological vessels. He believed that by encouraging one twin to adopt a female identity, complete with appropriate name, dress, and social role, and eventually arranging marriage between the twins, he could create the perfect continuation of bloodline without external corruption. Elspeth's early journal entries express horror at her husband's intentions. In September 1856, she wrote, "T has begun dressing one of the eldest boys in girls' clothing. The child weeps and tears at the garments, but T is resolute. He speaks of ancient traditions and divine templates, of Adam who contained Eve within him before separation. When I objected that such arrangements violate natural and divine law, he struck me for the first time in our marriage. He says the boys will thank him when they reach maturity, for they will have perfect companions who understand them completely, unmarred by feminine deficiencies of reason or masculine deficiencies of nurturing. May God forgive me for my weakness in allowing this to continue." Subsequent entries document a disturbing methodology of gender reassignment. Thaddeus administered unknown chemical preparations to the twins selected for feminization, adjusted their diets to suppress physical development, and implemented rigid behavioral conditioning that included rewards for feminine behavior and harsh punishments for masculine assertion. By 1860, Elspeth notes that the eldest feminine twin had begun to accept his assigned role, exhibiting Stockholm-like attachment to Thaddeus and repeating his philosophical justifications as if they were religious doctrine. Elspeth's journals suggest her initial horror at the proposal gradually transformed into religious acceptance as Thaddeus incorporated biblical references to support his theories. He particularly favored esoteric interpretations of Genesis, arguing that Adam's original form contained both male and female aspects before Eve's separation, and that identical twins represented a return to this divine original state. This theological manipulation appears to have been particularly effective on Elspeth, whose deeply religious upbringing made her vulnerable to scriptural authority, however misapplied. By 1870, Elspeth's entries suggest complete psychological surrender. She writes, "I now understand the divine wisdom in my husband's design. Our special children are blessed beyond ordinary humans, for they need never experience the disappointment and miscommunication that plague relations between separate men and women. Each pair forms a perfect union, a microcosm of God's original human design before the fall introduced disharmony between the sexes. I feel privileged to have birthed the vessels for this holy experiment, though the physical toll has been considerable." By 1876, the year of Thaddeus's ledger entry, the eldest twins, Thomas and his brother now sister Thomasina, had been cohabiting as husband and wife for 2 years and were attempting to conceive a child. The middle twins, Samuel and Samantha, were being prepared for their own ceremony once Samuel completed his medical apprenticeship under his father. The youngest pair, Frederick and his twin, were still being gradually separated into their respective roles, though, as later evidence would reveal, with significant resistance. Elspeth's journals become increasingly fragmentary after 1877, suggesting deteriorating mental health. Her final coherent entry in December of that year reads, "The seed has finally taken root. Thomas has succeeded where I failed 6 times. Thomasina's condition is confirmed. Thaddeus says the child will be perfect, uncontaminated. God forgive us all." Medical notes in Thaddeus's hand from this period reveal that Thomasina was indeed pregnant, though experiencing severe complications. Thaddeus documents administering various treatments, some recognizable as standard 19th century obstetric care, others involving substances identified only by coded designations. His notes express particular interest in ensuring the pregnancy produced twins with repeated references to doubling agents and cellular division stimulants administered throughout the first trimester. County death records indicate Elspeth Blackwood died in March 1878 of what was recorded as female hysteria leading to cerebral hemorrhage, a common misdiagnosis in an era when women's mental and physical health were poorly understood. Thaddeus did not remarry. Local rumors suggest Elspeth had become increasingly vocal about her concerns regarding the twins' welfare, particularly as Thomasina's. Pregnancy progressed with evident complications. Whether her death resulted from natural causes, the psychological stress of her family's situation, or more direct intervention remains unresolved. With Elspeth's death, the youngest twin, the one being prepared for the feminine role, appears to have found an advocate in Samuel, the medically trained middle brother. Samuel's medical notebook, kept separate from his father's records, documents growing concern about his youngest brother's psychological state. While never naming him directly, referring to him only as Subject F2, Samuel records, "Subject exhibits extreme distress at required costume. Have observed subject destroying assigned garments and stealing masculine attire from twin. Father insists feminine conditioning must intensify. I fear permanent damage to subject's mental constitution." Samuel's own intellectual development appears to have created growing skepticism toward his father's methods. His medical training, while conducted under Thaddeus's supervision, exposed him to standard texts that contradicted his father's theories. Marginalia, in Samuel's copy of Gray's Anatomy, questions his father's assertions about physiological gender malleability. Notes in his journal from late 1877 reveal increasing doubt. Father's insistence that biological sex is fluid enough to be redirected through chemical and behavioral means contradicts observable anatomical reality. His references to ancient texts and divine design appear increasingly divorced from modern medical understanding. I begin to wonder whether his entire system rests on fundamentally flawed premises. What follows is the most disturbing phase of the Blackwood family history. According to land records, in the summer of 1878, Thaddeus began construction of what he termed a therapeutic isolation facility in the estate's north woods. Samuel's notes indicate this structure, a small stone building with a single room, was designed to house the resistant youngest twin until his feminine nature emerged without distraction. County supply orders show delivery of restraint equipment typically used in asylums of the period, including a special chair with locking mechanisms. The structure itself, examined by archaeologists in 1967, revealed sophisticated sound-dampening features in its construction. The interior walls contained a layer of felt between double stone courses, while the floor incorporated sand-filled chambers beneath wooden planking. These design elements would have effectively muffled any sounds emanating from within, a feature whose purpose becomes evident in light of subsequent documentation. The youngest twin's confinement began on his 12th birthday in October 1878. Samuel's notes document a rotation system whereby the twin would receive daily reorientation therapy from either Thaddeus, Samuel, or Thomas. The twins' identical brother was forbidden from contact during this period, being told his sibling was receiving necessary treatment for dangerous impulses. Thaddeus's detailed protocols for this therapy included progressive stages of psychological breaking and rebuilding, beginning with isolation and sensory deprivation, followed by presentation of feminizing influences under conditions of physical restraint, and culminating in what he termed identity transference exercises that involved forced repetition of feminine self-identifications. Samuel's clinical notes maintain professional detachment during the early phases of confinement, though they document the subject's persistent resistance despite escalating corrective measures. By December 1878, however, his entries begin to express ethical reservations. Subject displays symptoms consistent with severe melancholia and dissociative states following daily sessions, sleep disturbances and self-harming behaviors increasing in frequency. Father dismisses these as necessary transitional turmoil, but standard medical ethics, as taught at reputable institutions, would classify current protocols as potentially damaging rather than therapeutic. The confinement was scheduled to last 3 months. It continued for nearly 2 years. During this period, the other family developments proceeded according to Thaddeus's plan. Thomas and his twin wife gave birth to a son in April 1879. A single child, not twins, much to Thaddeus's apparent disappointment. The child, named Elias after Thaddeus's father, exhibited what Samuel's notes describe as concerning developmental anomalies from birth, including cranial asymmetry, poor muscle tone, and delayed reflexive responses. Thaddeus's notes on the child's condition reveal a disturbing lack of paternal concern, instead documenting Elias as if he were an experimental outcome. Specimen exhibits expected signs of first-generation recombination inefficiency, anatomical irregularities within anticipated parameters for initial consanguineous pairing. Second-generation outcomes should show improved stability with proper selection protocols. This clinical detachment extended to his treatment recommendations, which included mechanical devices to reshape the infant's skull and a rigorous physical development regimen that caused the child considerable distress. Samuel and his twin wife formalized their union in a private ceremony in December 1879, documented only in Thaddeus's ledger with the notation, "Second pairing consummated. The bloodline strengthens." Samuel's private notes from this period reveal his growing strategy of apparent compliance masking planned resistance. Have proceeded with ceremony as required to maintain father's confidence. R, presumably his twin, understands our arrangement is temporary and performative only. We maintain separate sleeping quarters despite father's objections, citing R's feminine delicacy as requiring gradual acclimation. This pretense buys time while I develop more permanent solutions for our situation. The confined twins' eventual release in August 1880 coincided with Samuel's increased independence from his father. Having completed his medical training, Samuel established a small practice serving remote farms, giving him legitimate reason to travel beyond the estate's walls. His medical notes during this period show increasing scientific skepticism toward his father's theories, particularly after observing that Thomas and his twin's child displayed signs of developmental difficulties. What Samuel observed during his medical visits to neighboring communities would have provided stark contrast to the isolated world his father had constructed. Normal family structures, conventional marriages, and importantly, psychological well-being among children raised in such environments would have challenged the paradigm in which he'd been raised. His notes begin to include comparative observations between subjects raised under standard social conditions and his own family members, particularly his younger brothers. Samuel's practice brought him into contact with Dr. James Harrison, a physician in Des Moines with connections to more progressive medical institutions in Chicago and Philadelphia. Correspondence between the two doctors, preserved in Harrison's archives, shows Samuel cautiously seeking information about current psychological theories, particularly regarding identity formation and the effects of childhood trauma. Harrison appears to have supplied Samuel with recent medical journals and texts not available in Thaddeus's carefully controlled library. One letter from Harrison, dated July 1880, directly addresses Samuel's veiled concerns. The case you describe, though hypothetical as you assert, would be classified under modern understanding as severe psychological abuse. The subject's resistance to imposed identity indicates healthy self-preservation instincts rather than pathology requiring correction. I urge you to report any actual instances of such treatment to proper authorities. The crisis point came in February 1881. The previously confined twin, now 14, attempted escape during a severe snowstorm. He was found nearly frozen 3 miles from the estate by a local farmer who returned him to Thaddeus. The patriarch's ledger contains a single line regarding the incident. Therapeutic regression complete. Intensive reconditioning to commence immediately. Samuel's medical notes from the following day contain a rare emotional outburst. Cannot permit further application of father's methods. Subject F2 exhibited severe frostbite, requiring amputation of 2 toes, yet expressed preference for death over return. Standard medical ethics forbid continuation of treatment that produces such profound distress. Have removed subject to my quarters for recovery and observation. Father displeased, but acquiesced to medical authority. This direct intervention marks Samuel's first open defiance of his father's system. His subsequent notes document implementation of what he termed corrective therapy, essentially permission for the youngest twin to express his natural gender identity, coupled with reinforcement that his feelings and perceptions were valid rather than pathological. Samuel records, subject exhibits remarkable resilience despite prolonged psychological assault. When assured his masculine self-perception is correct and natural, emotional state improves dramatically. Most telling is his articulation that he always knew something was wrong, with father's insistence on his feminine identity. This inherent self-knowledge contradicts father's theory that gender is entirely malleable through external conditioning. This act of defiance marked the beginning of the end for Thaddeus's grand experiment. Over the next year, Samuel's notes document his systematic undermining of his father's influence. He began by establishing an alliance with the youngest twins, providing the feminized twin with masculine clothing in secret, and reinforcing his birth identity. He proceeded to introduce scientific literature contradicting his father's theories to the middle twins, his own twin wife, Samantha, gradually abandoning feminine affect and reclaiming his male identity as Samuel's brother rather than spouse. The eldest pair, Thomas and Thomasina, proved most resistant to intervention, having lived as husband and wife for nearly 7 years and sharing a child. Samuel's notes indicate he adopted a strategy of gradual education rather than confrontation, particularly focusing on the developmental challenges faced by their child as evidence of the genetic consequences of their arrangement. Thomas exhibited increasing hostility toward Samuel's suggestions, interpreting them as attacks on his family structure rather than medical concern. Thomasina, however, began expressing private doubts to Samuel about their situation, particularly regarding the health of their son and the prospect of future pregnancies. This period coincided with Thaddeus's declining health. Medical notes in Samuel's hand from mid-1882 document symptoms consistent with progressive neurological deterioration, tremors, memory lapses, episodes of paranoia, and impaired judgment. Rather than seek outside medical assistance, Samuel appears to have managed his father's condition personally, while using the patriarch's diminished capacity to gradually dismantle his systems of control. County records show Samuel assuming power of attorney for estate affairs in September 1882, citing Thaddeus's periods of confusion and incapacity. In October 1882, the conflict between Samuel and Thaddeus reached its climax. Samuel's notes abruptly end on October 12th with a cryptic entry: "Father has discovered my corrections to his system, has threatened to remove me permanently, must take decisive action. God forgive me, as I cannot forgive him." The following pages in his journal have been removed, with evidence of hasty tearing rather than careful extraction. County records indicate a fire at the Blackwood estate on October 15, 1882. The blaze originated in Thaddeus's medical library and spread to his bedroom. Thaddeus Blackwood perished in the fire. The inquest ruled the incident accidental, noting Thaddeus's known habit of falling asleep while reading by candlelight. However, Sheriff's Department notes indicate the investigating deputy found the bedroom door locked from the outside. A detail omitted from the official report following consultation with county officials concerned about scandal involving a prominent family. With Thaddeus gone, Samuel assumed control of the estate and immediately instituted sweeping changes. His first action was to demolish the therapeutic facility in the North Woods. His second was to establish legitimate identities for all his brothers, including the previously feminized twins who reclaimed their birth names and male identities. County records show Samuel registered his brothers at the courthouse in November 1882, explaining their previous absence from official records as the result of their father's religious eccentricities. The most complex situation involved Thomas and his twin, who had lived as husband and wife for nearly a decade. Samuel's solution was surprisingly progressive for the era. He established a legal guardianship for both Thomas and his twin over their child, while providing them separate residences on opposite ends of the estate. This arrangement allowed them to transition gradually from their imposed spousal relationship back to brotherhood while jointly parenting their child. Thomas's private journal from this period reveals profound psychological distress at this transition. His entries alternate between rage at Samuel's destruction of sacred bonds and moments of clarity in which he questions his entire reality. Samuel shows me medical texts proving that what Father called divine design was merely manipulation. If this is true, what else was false? If my beloved is truly my brother and not my wife, what does that make me? And what of our child, the product of an unholy union? I am lost between worlds, unable to return to innocence, yet unable to proceed with knowledge. For 5 years, the reformed Blackwood household existed in relative stability. Samuel established a legitimate medical practice. The youngest twins completed their education, and the middle twins, Samuel's brother and his own former wife, left Iowa entirely, relocating to California, where they established independent lives. Thomas and his twin maintained their cooperative but separate arrangement in raising their child. Though Thomas's journal entries show increasing preoccupation with his father's teachings and resentment towards Samuel's interventions. The final tragedy of the Blackwood family occurred in December 1887. According to statements given to the local sheriff, Thomas's behavior had become increasingly erratic following his separation from his twin. He began spending days in his father's remaining study, reading his journals and medical notes. He withdrew from community activities and stopped attending his son's joint custody exchanges, sending servants instead. His twin reported concerns to Samuel after Thomas sent a letter containing rambling assertions that they had violated divine order and must restore proper arrangement or face eternal consequence. On the night of December 18th, during a severe blizzard, Thomas forced his way into his twins' residence. What followed, based on the evidence collected, was a systematic murder of every remaining member of the Blackwood family present on the estate. Thomas first killed his twin with a surgical bone saw from his father's medical collection, then proceeded to the main house where he murdered Samuel and his youngest brothers as they slept. Most disturbing was his final act, the killing of his own 8-year-old son, who had been staying with Samuel that night. When the household staff discovered the scene the following morning, Thomas was found in the estate's cemetery, having taken his own life after digging a single large grave in the frozen ground. The official inquest ruled Thomas had suffered acute melancholia leading to homicidal mania, a common diagnosis for familicide in that period. However, documentation found in the estate suggested a more complex motive. Among Thomas's personal effects was a journal containing increasingly delusional entries in which he expressed certainty that his father had been correct, that he and his twin were divinely ordained to be joined as husband and wife, and that their separation was a sin against nature and God's design. His final entry stated simply, "If we cannot be united in life, we shall be in death." Father's vision will continue in another realm. The Blackwood estate was sold at auction in 1888. The proceeds divided among the surviving family members, the middle twins who had relocated to California. They never returned to Iowa, and according to correspondence with the estate's lawyers, requested no mementos or personal effects from their childhood home. The story might have ended there, forgotten amid the countless family tragedies of the 19th century, had it not been for the discovery made during renovation of the property in 1959. Workers dismantling a sealed wall in the East Wing discovered Elspeth's journals along with a collection of medical notes and correspondence that Thaddeus had apparently hidden from his sons. These documents revealed the most disturbing aspect of the entire Blackwood saga. The twins were not twins at all. Thaddeus Blackwood, leveraging his medical training and isolation from professional scrutiny, had been conducting crude experiments in infant physical modification. Each set of twins consisted of a natural-born son and an unrelated male infant, obtained through various means, some purchased from desperate mothers, others abducted from surrounding counties. Through careful manipulation of diet, primitive surgical alterations, and chemical treatments during early development, Thaddeus had created the appearance of identical twins. His detailed protocols document the process with disturbing precision. Infants were selected based on approximate age match to his biological sons, with preference for similar cranial structure and hair color. Initial modifications began with dietary adjustments to accelerate or restrict growth as needed to achieve physical similarity. By age 3, more direct interventions commenced, including binding techniques to modify skull shape, chemical treatments to match skin and hair pigmentation, and in some cases, minor surgical alterations to earlobes, noses, and other distinctive features. Most horrifying were Thaddeus's notes regarding language development and memory manipulation. He developed techniques to create shared memories between his biological sons and their manufactured twins, including coordinated storytelling, controlled social experiences, and strategic use of suggestive questioning to implant false recollections of shared early childhood. By controlling all aspects of their environment and social contact, he effectively constructed an artificial reality in which his creations believed themselves to be biological twins despite having no genetic relationship. His ultimate goal, revealed in his private notes, was to develop a method for creating perfect replications of superior human specimens. without relying on the unpredictability of natural birth. His arrangement of these artificial twins in pseudo-marital relationships was designed to test whether his modifications extended to reproductive compatibility, whether his artificially created twins could successfully reproduce with one another. This revelation contextualizes many previously puzzling aspects of the Blackwood history. The statistical impossibility of Elspeth bearing 6 sets of identical twins is explained by the fact that she bore 6 single children, with their twins acquired separately. The developmental difficulties in Thomas's child resulted not from simple consanguinity, but from Thaddeus's chemical modifications affecting reproductive function. The persistent resistance of the youngest feminized twin likely stemmed not just from gender dysphoria, but from some deeper, unconscious awareness of his fundamental difference from his supposed identical twin. Particularly haunting is the realization that the middle twins who escaped to California, the only survivors of the family, likely lived their entire lives believing they were biological brothers, never knowing they had no genetic relationship whatsoever. Census records from San Francisco in 1900 show them living as Samuel and Robert Blackwood, operating a modest medical practice specializing in pediatric care. Neither married, and they maintained a shared residence until Robert's death in 1922. Samuel lived until 1931, leaving his estate to a children's hospital with the stipulation that funds be used for the psychological care and protection of children's inherent sense of identity. The implications of this discovery transformed the Blackwood family story from one of bizarre family dynamics to one of calculated human experimentation. It explained the statistical impossibility of Elspeth bearing 6 sets of identical twins, the developmental difficulties in Thomas's child, and perhaps most poignantly, the persistent resistance of the youngest feminized twin, an unrelated boy whose innate sense of self repeatedly rejected the identity being forced upon him. The Blackwood estate changed hands multiple times over the subsequent decades, but never prospered as it had under Thaddeus's management. Local folklore attributed this to the tainted soil or spiritual corruption left by the family's dissolution. A more scientific explanation emerged when soil samples taken in 1972 revealed high concentrations of mercury, arsenic, and several unidentified chemical compounds, likely residue from Thaddeus's experiments, rendering the once fertile land increasingly toxic. Today, the remaining structures of the Blackwood estate stand abandoned, the fields returned to wild prairie. The family cemetery, containing the mass grave dug by Thomas for his manufactured family, has been reclaimed by the landscape, its headstones gradually sinking into the Iowa soil, as if the earth itself is slowly erasing all evidence of what transpired there. The most profound horror of the Blackwood family story lies not in the violence of its conclusion, but in the calculated way human lives were manipulated in service to one man's distorted vision. Each twin represented a life stolen, an identity erased, and a future predetermined by Thaddeus's experimental design. The true identities of these children, their original names, birthplaces, and families, remain unknown, their existence as independent beings subsumed into Thaddeus Blackwood's grand delusion. Perhaps the final word on the Blackwood family should come from the journal of the youngest feminized twin, the only one of Thaddeus's subjects who consistently resisted his assigned role. His identity was eventually restored by Samuel, and according to county records, he took the name Robert Clark upon leaving the estate in 1885. His journal, discovered among Samuel's effects, contains this reflection. I always knew I was not who they claimed I was. Even as they dressed me as a girl and called me by a girl's name, even as they showed me my twin and told me we were the same person divided in two, I knew it was a lie. There was another life meant for me, a life that was stolen. While I cannot reclaim that original life, I can at least live the remainder of my days as my true self, not as someone's experiment. Robert Clark left Iowa in 1888 following the tragedy, eventually settling in Boston, where records indicate he became a respected physician specializing in pediatric medicine. His medical publications include several influential papers on the importance of psychological care in childhood development and the profound harm caused by forcing children to suppress their authentic identities. Whether his colleagues ever knew the personal experiences that informed his professional compassion remains unknown. The Blackwood family ledger, Elspeth's journals, and Thaddeus's notes are now preserved in the archives of the Iowa Historical Society, accessible only to qualified researchers with appropriate credentials. They stand as testament to the dangers of unchecked scientific ambition divorced from ethical constraint, and to the remarkable resilience of the human spirit even when subjected to the most profound manipulation. Even in darkness so complete, the light of true identity found its way through. The implications of the Blackwood case extend beyond its immediate horror into questions about the nature of identity itself. If children could be so thoroughly conditioned to believe a manufactured reality, to accept artificial kinship as biological fact, what does this suggest about the malleability of human perception and memory? Conversely, the persistent resistance of some subjects to their imposed identities points to some deeper, perhaps immutable core of selfhood that resists even the most comprehensive environmental manipulation. Modern psychological analysis of the case suggests Thaddeus Blackwood exhibited characteristics consistent with several severe personality disorders. Combined with intellectual brilliance and the environmental opportunity to implement his disturbed vision without oversight, his meticulous documentation reveals a mind entirely divorced from empathy while maintaining perfect awareness of human psychology. Precisely the combination that enables the most profound forms of abuse. His legacy serves as a warning about the dangers of intellectual arrogance divorced from moral constraint, and the devastating consequences when scientific curiosity supersedes human dignity.